Okay, why don't we get started? Hi, I'm Steve Forgiato. I'm the membership director here at AIA Chicago, and welcome to Submitting for Fellowship, hosted by Robert Theel and Dan Wheeler. We are recording this meeting, and I will be distributing it to everybody who signed up to attend. If anybody who's a Fellows nominee for the AIA Chicago chapter, or if you're on any of our various fellowship lists, you will get a copy of this PowerPoint and the recording sometime probably early next week. We ask that everyone mute themselves for right now and let the presentation happen, and then unmute themselves for the question and answer at the end. Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Robert Theel, FAIA, to get things going.
Thanks, Steve. Welcome. Looks like we've got a little over 20 participants today, which is great. We're going to be sharing with you a PowerPoint and some information from our experiences, Dan and I, on how to best submit, or what we may think we know about best submitting for fellowship. I know there's a wide range of people probably on the call today. Some may be looking to submit this year. Some may be just wanting to find out exactly what fellowship is all about, and we'll be able to meet any of your needs with this PowerPoint. It's a high-level PowerPoint, but it can get into some detail if we need to. And we encourage you to write down questions as you're thinking about what we're talking about, and we want to have plenty of time at the end to respond to any questions you may have. I'm Robert Theel. I work for EXP here in the city of Chicago, and I am also formally the chief architect for the U.S. General Services Administration. I am also the chairman of the fellowship committee for AIA Chicago this year. And with me, I'm going to let him introduce himself, is Dan Wheeler, FAIA. Dan?
Yep. So Dan Wheeler with Wheeler Kearns Architects. Bob has run this very well for the last couple of years, and has done this presentation, so I'm assisting him a little bit today. My background, went to RISD. Our office is roughly 17 people. I teach at UIC and have done so since '92, and I was elevated within the design category in 1998.
Great, thanks, Dan.
Yep.
And by the way, this is the first time for both of us doing this presentation. Usually Carl De Silva does it, but as you'll see later, Carl is on the National Fellowship panel this year, so he is prohibited from actually making the presentation, which he has done so well in the past few years. But I think you're in good hands. We'll cover all the bases for you today. Okay, with that, let's jump right in. Just the opening slides, we're going to do an overview, cover the important dates, which we are not sure of just yet, talk about the submission process, go over the objects, talk about the jury and how they operate, and then share with you some resources, and of course that all-important Q&A. College of Fellows is something that in its modern form was founded in 1952 in terms of how we go about elevating AIA members into membership. Prior to that, I think it was more of a you did something and you were elevated by somebody directly, or I'm not sure exactly how that process may work. I don't know if you know, Dan, but the modern process that we use today with application was founded in some form back in the 50s. It is, as we all know, one of the highest honors that you can get in the AIA. Only 3% of all members are actually elevated to fellowship, so it's a very high honor. Part of what fellowship is about is really promoting the institute, stimulating sharing of interests among fellows, advancing the profession, mentoring. There's a lot of things that fellows do, volunteering their time, such as Dan and I are right now, to help advance the profession. And there's all sorts of things that the the fellowship community works on and contributes to, that is a way of us paying back or paying it forward, if you will, to help others in the profession and members of AIA. Dan, did you want to add something to that?
Well, I think it's an opportunity for the profession to kind of take a look at certain individuals and how they can kind of best advance the goals of the profession. And so it both is what you have done, but also what you can do in the future in that regard.
Very good. This is a little statistics. You'll note it in the beginning. I should have mentioned that this PowerPoint slides are from last year. We haven't received an updated slides yet, so a little bit of the information is outdated, but nonetheless it's still effective. So this is tracking the fellowship elevation from 2022, which is the previous year, not 2023. So in 2022 there were 219 candidates that submitted applications. 88 of those were elevated, which is about a 40% elevation rate. I'm not sure if that's typical, but it sounds like it is. This year, I do know in 2023, or this last go around, 76 were elevated. I don't have the number of candidates that applied, but according to Carl De Silva, he thought it was about 200. So that would be seemingly following about the 40% rate for elevation in any year. Now, the elevation is broken down by years. 65% of those elevated get it during their first year, 27% in their second year, and about 7% in their third year of application. So that not everyone gets it the first year, and that's fine. Sometimes they need some refinement and some change and modification to their application to make it more effective. And there's no shame in not getting it in the first go around. It's like passing the architectural exam. You got to keep that.
Yeah.
And then below that, we have percentage of elevated candidates by object. Object one, which is design, is about 22%. That's a lower number than most people realize. They don't realize that object two is actually almost 50% of applicants apply and receive fellowship in object two. And we'll talk about what the objects are a little bit later in a little more detail. Object three is contributions to the Institute. Object four, service, public service, government. That's the object that I got fellowship in. Object four are about 6 to 7%. Object five is another profession outside or volunteering of work outside of architecture, about 10%. That seems to be a growing number, object five, in the last few years. And then object six is teaching, literature, and other such things that are related to architecture. That was pulled out of object five recently in the past 5 years, I believe, and it created its own category. So it has lower numbers, a little bit lower numbers than some of the others.
And I think the thing I would add to this is that this is a national the elevation, but I would say that historically the Chicago chapter has had a pretty successful batting average in terms of applications, just because of the counseling that I received, I remember years ago and so forth. So I think we can assist you.
Right.
We're here to help. Yeah.
Actually, I do have that statistic. Of the 76 elevated last year, Illinois, I'm going to say
Illinois
6, and that's about 8%. So that is a pretty high number in terms of how many people from Illinois were elevated out of the 76, 8% of the total. That's pretty good. Okay, these important dates, as I mentioned, you see they're crossed out. You have to come back to the website later and double check to make sure, especially if you're applying this year, what the actual dates are. Historically, it's always been on or around October 6th, but depending on what day that falls, they may adjust it one day or the other, one way or the other. And submission period is supposed to, I believe, open the 27th this year. That's when they hope to update this PowerPoint presentation. So when you go to the website, go back about a week from now, and a lot of this should be updated. And note that very important note at the bottom, submission dates are strictly observed. If you're submitting this year, there are no exceptions. Delaying and trying to upload all your information at the last hour is not advised, because there are always computer glitches, there are always issues. So you don't want to be caught at the 11th hour missing the final cutoff date at midnight on the 6th. Just some general ideas. This is kind of straightforward. Submissions should be clear, concise. They should be results oriented, well documented, and well documenting the influence on the profession. These are kind of big, high level things you want to think about as you're contemplating putting together a draft or putting together your final submission. No brainer, but I keep going back to some of these slides, and there's a couple other ones like this that I used to tape on the wall when I was doing mine back in 2016 to remind myself to keep thinking about the high level goals of what we're trying to present. Fellowship tips. This is one of the ones that I put up there on the wall. Who are you? You need to explain, of course, who you are, where you come from, what your background is. What you accomplished is really critically important. When it occurred, why it's significant is just as important as what you accomplished. And then how it benefited or shared with was benefited or shared with the profession. And then finally, you need to prove it with your exhibits. So this is a good checklist to keep reminding yourself. A lot of times we see submissions, preliminary submissions, that are simply stating what a candidate accomplished. I did this, I did this, I did this, I did that, I did that, and without really saying what it means or why it's significant and the impact or ripple effect it may have had on the profession. It's really important to think about that. Dan, did you want to add anything there?
The only thing I would add, I mean, and again, I mentioned to Bob earlier, this whole submission process is really about, it's almost like putting together tenure papers for a university position. And so again, it's like the only thing that's missing from this is kind of the underlying hidden thing is what can you where are you moving forward from this? And so if you have something to offer to the profession that they can learn from you, that will assist in your papers.
Yeah, good. Dan, you want to carry on with this one?
Yeah, it's basically eligible. You're going to be 10 years in good standing, and you can again check in with AIA to make sure that you have consistently been in there for 10 years.
Yeah, and I found out too that the 10 years does not have to be consecutive. It is just cumulative. So if you happen to miss a year or something or whatever, it's a number of 10 years total. AIA Chicago, Steve can help you with that, or your secretary in your other organization. I think we have someone from Illinois chapter here today, or you can go to the AIA membership history at that site and just verify your status.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nomination. There are two ways to oh wait, is this the same thing? Oh yeah. This is two ways to apply, basically, if you will. You or to get initial nomination endorsement. One is by a petition of individual members or fellows, and it needs to bear the signature of any 10 architect members or any 5 fellows in good standing. So if you're doing it on your own without chapter assistance, that's what you would need to do. And many chapters, that's how they do it. You have to get those folks to endorse your candidacy, if you will. The AIA Chicago chapter has a more robust program where we have a committee, and we like to vet the candidates' initial draft submissions. So the AIA, the chapter will receive draft submissions from candidates, potential candidates, like we did this year earlier, and then we will vet them and provide comments on what we think their chances of success are this year. We may say, yes, you're good, we're going to endorse you, but other ones we may say, you may need to work a little more on putting together your theme, your story. We need to see a little more evidence so that we know that you have a much better chance of success. And the reason for that is such that we're not putting forward anybody and everybody who decides they want to submit. We don't want to overwhelm the national fellowship jury with candidates that maybe aren't ready or weren't prepared, because they're going to have enough time, going over the 200 to 240 submissions already. So we in the Chicago chapter try to do that ahead of time a little bit to get a handle on that. So 2 different ways to do it. And we're already getting into the submission section. Generally, the composition of your submittal will include these 4 sections. The first one, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail, is your sponsor letter. The sponsor is the individual that you have selected to help you with the process, someone who knows you very, very well and can speak to your achievements and your accomplishments in your profession. Very important to select carefully and get the buy-in from your sponsor. That sponsorship letter will detail, or it's only 1 page, but it will give a strong overview of your primary objective or category, and 2 or 3 or 4 of your primary subcategories. And that's extremely important to set the tone for the jury to understand that this is coming from a respected member of the architectural community, and they are endorsing you strongly and firmly and clearly. Following the sponsor letter, you start moving into what you have created. Section 1 is also just 1 page, but it contains a couple of key, very important elements. The 35-word statement, which I'm sure many of you may have probably heard about, which is your concise, well-crafted, well-thought-out statement of what it is that you are going after. It's not just about, I'm going after object 1 or object 2, but it really is what it is that you feel is the highlight of your achievement in the profession that you want to showcase. Usually people go through many versions of this, developing this, but it's good to get started on it early and start thinking about it and revising it and getting input from your sponsor and others to help you develop a strong 35-word statement. Following that, summary of achievements is again on that same 1 page. It may be the 3 or 4 subcategories of your primary idea, your primary story, which tells us a little bit more, an overview, an executive summary of those 3 or 4 categories. I like to think about it as like a PowerPoint presentation. You're going to tell people what you're going to tell them, then you're going to tell it to them, and then later you're going to tell it to them again, so that it starts coming across, and clearly by the time that the jury is reading the first 2 pages, they should have a pretty good idea of who they're looking at and what it is that they're going to be focusing on when they get into more detail in the submission. Section 2 Section 2 and 3 are by far the bulk of the presentation. There's only 40 pages total allowed, and Section 2 is probably up to 20 pages, could be more. But you want to save enough pages, no more than 20, for Section 3, which is the exhibits. This is covered later. Significant work, honors, awards, recognition, publications, pretty straightforward. We can talk about that in a little more detail in a bit. And then Section 3 is your exhibits. These are your support, be they, if you were in design, it might be projects. If you were in government like me, it might be a program that you developed and instituted for an organization. There's many different types of exhibits that you would use to support your case. Bear in mind, and a lot of people don't realize this, it's not just all about architecture, about building projects. That's very important, and it's important to show architecture. You need to do that as appropriate. But many of the exhibits, and especially in some of the other categories, are not necessarily building projects. They may be, as I mentioned, initiatives or programs that you have developed and implemented for, in my case, the General Services Administration that had national impact. I can show you examples of that later. Dan, you did Object One, so you were probably utilizing more architecture and projects, I assume.
To a certain degree, and I have a page I can share. Again, I got it fairly early on, and so I didn't have maybe as bulk of work as some that were going after Object One. So it was more the kind of the level of involvement in outside enterprises, Architectural Alliance, Architectural Club, teaching, and so forth. So again, as Bob said, it may not just be about buildings, but it's actually about like developing a culture that you're working with. And then maybe if I can just chime in here, I think if I just get my annotate, I would emphasize the choice of your sponsor and how important that individual will be in terms of working on and helping you assist in honing the haiku of your 35 words. This is the statement that is read as you go up and you get your, you become a fellow and they put the little medal around you. That word or that statement is read to the assembly and then the summary of achievement. So this is like the one-page thing that says, okay, this is who this person is. And I think as we talk about the jury and who will represent you at the national level, this is super, super important. The sponsor letter, and then also these, the exhibits certainly are going to be important. And then it's the reference letters that will give an outside understanding of who you are, and choosing the sponsor will assist those letter writers to kind of look at you from different vantage points. And so instead of it just always kind of reinforcing what everyone knows, we'll want to see what you look like front on the side, on the back, and so forth. And that's what these reference letters will assist with.
That's really good. Yeah, you want a diversity of perspectives in the reference letters that can show and support again your premise, but from you don't want them all to be the same. They want them from a variety of different sources.
Yeah.
Great. These are some target objectives as you put your submission documents together. Just some basic, good practices while you're writing and while you're gathering your information and formulating your thoughts. Be strong, be specific, or you should have a strong, specific sponsor letter. We've already talked about the importance of that. And the same with the reference letters. They are not going to make, well, in a way, I was going to say they're not going to make or break you, but they will. If you've got weak letters or letters where you haven't thought about them well or selected carefully, you don't want, as in somebody told me one time, you don't want to go doing a name dropping type thing. You don't want to just go back to a professor in college because he or she has a high profile name and get them to do you a reference letter if they don't really know you. You want somebody who can really support you and speak to who you are and what you've accomplished. And I think what it is that comes through in the letter. I think the jury can tell if it's sort of a generic, this is a good candidate, he or she should be elevated, or if somebody really, really knows who you are. So that's important to think about both of those.
And what are the important things is when the letter writers are writing, and your sponsor will assist you with this, is they will want to send your statement, your 35-word statement, as well as your summary, as well as your exhibits, and so that they understand what you're going in, and so they can reinforce that.
Yep. Well-organized submission sounds like a no-brainer, but keep it simple, keep it straightforward. I've seen many submissions that overwork their their submission. They start thinking too much, or they have too much time, and they start loading it up with things that maybe are extraneous and don't need to be there. So keep that always in mind, because this is a jury that we'll talk about in a little bit, has limited time to review this. You need to keep it well organized. You need to keep it straightforward, make it easy for them to get to the relevant information of your submission. Don't overwhelm them with minutia. The overall submission is not excluding the sponsor letter, is not to exceed 40 pages. And they say 8.5 by 11. But of course, everything's submitted on computer nowadays, but the equivalent of 8.5 by 11 on a computer, and 10-point font is the minimum. You cannot go any smaller in the body of your submission for obvious reasons. Make it easy to read. Don't make it, give a little room between your lines so that the candidate, the jury can read it readily. Landscape format, I'm told now, is the preferred format. I did it portrait the other, in my day, because that's just what we did. But now they're reading all of these on computer screens, of course, and landscape is easier, again, for the jury to do that. You don't have to do it that way, but it kind of maybe gives you a little bit of a leg up if you think about it. If you're going through that jury. I heard one guy say to me one time, well, maybe if I do it portrait, I'll be different and the jury will notice me more. Well, maybe, but maybe they'll also be frustrated by having to scroll constantly through your submission. Landscape is preferred. Clear, concise summary statement that is not overreaching. Again, don't say I solved world hunger. Say I contributed to the solution of world hunger by doing this or that or this thing. You don't want something that's too all-encompassing. You want to be as specific as you can be, but broad in your impact. High quality images. So, we're all architects, so we're all visual. It's very important. Your exhibits should be strong and clearly illustrate the support for your submission. Consistency, leadership, results. These are just catchphrases that, I'm sorry, no, not catchphrases. They're things that you should include and think about constantly in your submission. Here we get into more detail about the sponsor. The sponsor needs to be a fellow of the American Institute of Architects or an AIA member. They do not need to be a fellow. They can just be an AIA member, but in good standing, of course. That's important to check too. Make sure that there's no problem with their membership. Should be someone that you know well. They can speak knowledgeably and critically about your career. I think someone who can be honest with you is important. You don't want somebody who's just saying you're the greatest thing since sliced bread. Oh man, you're fantastic. You should deserve to be a fellow. You want somebody who can be critical and actually give you some advice that maybe you don't want to hear, because it'll make your submission that much better. Just a simple example. I remember my sponsor was Julie Snow, and she told me when she first read my initial draft, she said, you know what, Bob, you got to lose your Midwestern modesty, and you got to stop saying we and us, and you got to start saying I and me. And she was absolutely right, because in government, I don't know, we just tend to talk that way. And when I started reading it, I realized I was giving up a lot of the accomplishments that I had done. As part of a team, well, what did I do in the team? Did I lead the team? Did I facilitate the team? That's fine. But that was just one good piece of advice that Julie was able to do and give to me. Ideally, the sponsor is not someone from your own firm. That's probably an initial thought. You have someone in your firm that does know you well. It's not unheard of, but I think the jury kind of looks at that with a little critically. They probably think they don't know anybody outside the community, and they're going for fellowship. So try to find someone outside your firm who knows you well, an associate, someone from school, teaching environment, another firm, AIA associate, or client maybe even. There's a lot of opportunities out there that you should think about. A sponsor may sponsor more than one candidate. but that sponsor needs to speak specifically to each candidate's individual achievements. That's kind of more advice for the sponsor. This isn't generic. They're not just writing a one-size-fits-all support for candidates. They need to do it very specifically to each candidate. And they will, as Dan, you already mentioned, they will be very involved in the submission process. They are going to write their sponsor letter. They're going to assist you in crafting your submission, your 35-word statement, your summary, reviewing your documents for you, giving you advice. And they're also going to be the, apart from an initial outreach that you will have to your reference folks asking for their reference letter, they're going to be the liaison with those reference writers to make sure that they're getting their letters done and that the letters are getting done and input on time, because all those reference letters need to be submitted before you submit your papers into the system. If they're not, you're not qualified. You're disqualified. So it's a very important job that the sponsor needs to do, to follow up with the references to make sure that that gets done. Dan, have you been a sponsor? Is there anything you want to add?
Let's see. I've sponsored several candidates, and I would say that the sponsor is your kind of, as Bob said, your kind of devil's advocate. They're going to kind of poke you and say, well, is that really what you need to do? Can you do it better? Rewrite this, edit it down. Choosing and conferring with the reference writers is important. Although sometimes, we just had people, Julie in my office, my wife would follow up with some of the writers to make sure that they had submitted their stuff. So it's not like the sponsor has to do all of the minutia, but Larry Booth was my sponsor, and someone in his office assisted with getting some of the letters, just making sure that they were, submitted on time.
Yeah, it's important to know that you as a candidate will not see the reference letters. In fact, if you do, you will be disqualified. So bear in mind, those letters did not go through you. They go directly to the upload site for fellowship, and you are not allowed to see those letters.
Yep.
So anyway, good, great. Yep. More on the sponsor letter. This is really for the sponsor. It should be addressed to the jury chair. It's a one-page letter of support of the candidate, must be uploaded with the submission portfolio. You do get to see the sponsor letter. The sponsor shares that with you. So that goes along with your application. And that will set up the submission to follow. That the letter should set up the submission to follow. It should be talking about you and what the jury is about to see in your application. And it should be somewhat specific. Reference letters maybe hit upon one, maybe two traits or characteristics of you, but the sponsor letter should kind of hit it all and really talk about you as a holistic candidate for fellowship.
Yep.
Okay. Section 1, we've talked about the summary. Something that's very important, and I know we've been doing this in the preliminary vetting of draft submissions for endorsement by the fellowship committee here at AIA Chicago, is a lot of folks are missing that they need to focus on three main points. There's the overall arching concept that you're working on. There's your 35-word statement, which sets your theme or your story. And then you need to break that down into 3, maybe 4 parts so that you can start focusing more specifically on some details to tell your story. And I think that's a good thing to think about. It's not a requirement, but it's just a good suggestion. And if you look at some of the examples in the AIA Fellowship website, you will see that. You will see the summary pages broken down into 3 clear sections that make it easy for the jury to understand the 3 or 4 items that support your main theme. Those main themes then will be expanded upon in section 2, as you'll see later. But this is just the summary right now, the 1-page summary that's explaining your application. Be clear, again, be concise, again, be insightful. You can be creative with this. Make it interesting. Get the jury to want to read your story. This is where if you're good at writing, you should spend a lot of time. This isn't just laying out facts. This is getting a little creative in making it an intriguing story. If you're not as good at writing, get some input maybe or help from some others who are to cater it to make sure it's telling your story in the best way possible. Restate claims from the sponsor letter. Again, tell it to them, tell them what you're going to tell them, tell it to them, and then tell it to them again in a summary form. And speak to the ripple effect of work. We'll talk about that, I think, in the next slide, actually. Yeah, here we are. Ripple effect means, if you haven't heard this before, you're going to hear it often. It means exactly what it sounds like. What is the impact in the next ring, the next ring, the next ring after that? How am I impacting others through the work that I've done? It's impacting beyond your day-to-day efforts. It may be through speaking. It may be through publication or writing. It may be mentoring. It may be service to the AIA or other organizations like NOMA. There may be a geographic impact that extends beyond, let's say, the Chicago area, that has a statewide impact, or it has a national impact or an international impact. These are ripple effects that are very important for the jury to understand, because that's what a fellow in a successful professional career is endeavoring to do, is to get that influence, that positive influence out there and spreading. Legacy through others. It's a good summary for that. Dan, anything?
Yeah, no, I think all those things make are clear. The legacy through others, whether you've influenced students, influence others to start their own practices, using them as examples, and that might also be part of your letter writers.
Yeah, and different objects are going to have different ripple effects. You know, in a firm such as yours, Dan, you mentioned where you were teaching, so that may be a ripple effect on something
Yep.
that you is teach. For me in government, it was influencing other regional chief architects in other parts of the country, and
Yep.
so there's different ripple effects that you can have. There's no one way to do it, but think about that. It's important. Yep. Okay, section 2. This is what I mentioned before. Is the one of the almost 50% of your submission. This is going to cover your accomplishments, your honors, awards, recognitions, and publications. This is where you can talk about, excuse me, your projects. Talk about the types of projects you've worked on. Talk architectural projects or initiatives or development of papers or different things. I mean, they all don't have to be building projects per se, but you know, a lot of them should be. We are architects. We want to see architecture. Jury service. If you've been sat on design committees, selection committees, or architect engineer selection committees, or other such juries, even sitting on a critique at a university to critique students' work on a student jury or professional jury for students. That's another way. Again, that's all illustrating ripple effect, but it's also contributing to others, and that's really important to highlight that and show your engagement with the professional architectural community on all levels. What presentations or lectures have you done for the AIA or for NOMA or for CMAA or whatever organization that you're engaged with or involved in? Or it could be even non-architectural lectures and speaking engagements. Any of that is important if you're conveying and utilizing your background as an architect to convey issues important to architecture. Also, another opportunity here to document your AIA involvement. And again, not just AIA, I've mentioned all the other types of organizations as well related to architecture. All of that's important. Design Build Institute of America, if you're a member of that, or what have you. And then civic and volunteer involvement. This may not be related directly to architecture, but as architects are engaged in civic and voluntary movements, and we find that very important in the work that we do. Those types of things relate back to and contribute well in the jury's eyes in terms of what you as an architect are contributing and doing. It also, kind of portends the future. If you are a good fellow and you've done these things, you will continue to contribute and volunteer your time to further the profession. Honors awards and recognition, that goes without saying. Again, it can be AIA awards, it can be other organizational awards, it can be different types of awards and recognition. It may be personal recognition. It may be employee of the year for something in an organization, something like that. A lot of different things to think about there. The more you think about some of these things, the more you realize you've got a lot of this stuff there that's worth bringing forward. Publications. This could take many forms too. This could be things you personally publish, right? It could be videos that you participated in or made. It could be articles written about you, or it could be things about your work, the work that you do. So there's a wide range of latitude here on what publications mean. It doesn't necessarily mean how many papers have I published in architecture journal or architect or AIA journal or whatever. That's great, but and those are good to note, of course. But there's a wider range of things too that you can include in there as well. I don't know if it's kosher or not. I never found out, but on mine, I actually had participated in the development of a number of videos that were used in our GSA's Design Excellence program, and I was one of the speakers on those videos. And I included a couple of clips in my submission where they could clip on it and they could see me talking. So I don't know, nobody said that I couldn't do that, but you might want to check first to see if that's because I'm sure we don't want to go toward all video presentations for AIA Fellowship, but I tried that and I didn't get my hands slapped. So anyway. Section 2 tips, demonstrate broad influence and impact, group similar accomplishments together. I think that's important for when it comes to awards and recognition. If you've got a number of AIA awards, you probably want to group them together. Don't do it chronologically, do it more in terms of AIA or different organizational awards. Whatever makes the most sense, and again makes sense for the jury to understand. Chronological may not be the best for some of those categories. You may want to group them differently. Work supporting your case first. I'm not sure what that means. Explain any time gaps. I guess, if you went off and worked for the Peace Corps or something for 5 years, I guess just state that cleanly and clearly why there's a gap in your resume. Divide up different types of awards. Talked about that. And make distinction about the articles. Make sure that you're clear about, as I mentioned before, there's a wide range of articles or publications or videos or things like that. Make sure that you're clear about which ones are about you or which ones are authored by you, so that there's no misunderstanding about that.
Yeah, the only thing I would add here is that when you're working in a group practice and it's what you contributed to specific projects, and oftentimes in the exhibits, as you'll see, you will need to have a partner or someone from the firm kind of acknowledge that you did the work that is being presented. And
that'll come up in the exhibits,
yep,
for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And here we are. Do you want to take that one, Dan? I'll fill in the floor for a second. Go ahead.
Sure. I think what did you accomplish that was beyond the norm? And so what was the challenge? And oftentimes we'll say, okay, well, this is the problem we saw in the problem, and then your role in terms of responding to it and what it achieved. And the more specific you can say, hey, this is significant. It was a low budget, but we did this. That's something that you can use as a soundbite. Considering showing more than a minimum of 5 projects, but only the strongest projects. So if you have a lot of projects that are following a certain train of thought, more than 5 is fine, but certainly the strongest projects, and then also kind of cull out images that aren't going to be memorable. Yeah, and declaration of responsibility is, again, the key thing, is like, what did you do within this group practice where you were doing work in a team of 20? What did you do? What was your responsibility, and how did that benefit the team in the project?
And actually that also, and you'll see that in a little bit, and you'll see that in some of the information on the website too. You actually have to have a statement signed by someone who can verify that
Yep.
you had responsibility for some aspects of this work. So that declaration of responsibility is very important, because it's basically someone attesting to your the validity of what you're stating that you did. But yeah, everything Dan said, you know, state what you did, state what the challenge was, state what you did, and state what the outcome is. You know, it's that kind of that typical troika. What's the problem? What did you do to solve it? And then what was the outcome? References. This is the reference letters that we were talking about before. So after the exhibits, oh, by the way, I was going to say exhibits, maximum 20 pages. I believe that's somewhere else in here. You cannot have more than 20 pages. So you got to meet those out carefully. And by the way, the 5 projects are in design. You have a minimum of 5 projects. But as Dan said, your strongest. In the other categories, you can have more exhibits than that. Okay, because you want buildings, but you don't necessarily need to have them first, is what that one says. Yeah. And I have an example of that later. If we get time, I can show you that. So the reference letters, these must remain confidential. Got to emphasize that again. You will not be seeing these letters or reading them or looking at them or influencing them in any way. They will be uploaded with the insistence of your sponsor directly to the website. 5 letters must be from AIA members. There's a total of 7, I believe 7 letters. Yeah, 7 letters that you need to submit in your first year. So 5 letters must be from AIA members. The writers must sign their letters with their AIA designation to avoid disqualification. They're very strict about that. Each reference should focus on 1 or 2 points from your summary statement. They're not expected to write like a sponsor letter who's covering everything, but just focusing on maybe one aspect of your career that they know about well and can focus on and speak eloquently to. Speak directly about your work. Seek those with a direct connection. They should be recognized leaders in your field. We were talking to somebody here a few weeks ago that did a lot of work in CAD and advanced CAD standards in their firm and their world. And so the national director of the ArtCAD or whatever knows this person. I said, well, see, that would be a great person to write a reference letter, because it has national impact and they can speak directly to what you've done, you know, that type of thing. But they also are a recognized leader in their field. Try to seek a broad geographic range. Don't have every letter coming from Chicago. You know, it's better to have that diversity, to see that your reach goes beyond just a limited geographic range. And I've mentioned this before. Avoid big names offering no specificity or little substance. It really doesn't do you much good to do that. You really want people who know you. In fact, there's stories about that backfiring on some people, but we won't go there. Yeah. Submitting reference letters, applicants send a link. Okay, we don't have to go through this.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing at the bottom there, 2nd and 3rd year applicants' previous letters are rolled over. If you don't make it the first year, your 7 letters are rolled over again, but they ask you to get 3 more letters. So that's the only change there with the reference letters in your 2nd year. The first 7 are valid, but they ask for 3 more. Again, just some checklist here. Be concise. We've heard that before. Be clear. White space is a good thing. I think they're trying to say, don't overcrowd your page. Don't fill it with too much information. You need to be eligible. Get a strong sponsor. Strong specific references. Get support for your summary statement. Demonstrate influence on the profession. Ripple effect.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. We're not going to go into a lot of detail on the objects, but we're just going to highlight them here. If somebody has any questions about them, we can bring them up at the end. Object one, why don't you talk about this one, Dan? Since that's your object.
Yeah, it's a urban design. Yeah, again, I think we can kind of move through this, but again, the jury does not judge the design itself. We'll talk a little bit about the jury process, which I think is enlightening, that Carl gave us some insight on. But the jury is looking for peer recognition and impact on a national level. So just getting beyond your local level and saying, hey, check what's going on in Chicago, that is helping the kind of spell out the ripple effect that your work is doing.
Good. Practice management or practical technical advancement. This is the one that 50% of folks apply for, to advance the science and art of planning and building by advancing the standards of practice. So how have you elevated your firm? How are you sharing with the profession? If you read in, there's more detail on the website. If you read into this one, this makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. You're still talking about projects, you're talking about advancing the practice more than just maybe being the lead designer.
Yep.
Led the institute or related organization. This is kind of a no-brainer. It's pretty straightforward. Those of you who may have had significant contribution already to AIA or other professional organizations related to architecture, if it's significant, you may want to consider going for Object 3. It makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
Object 4, public service, government, industry, or organization. This is advancing the living standards of people through their improved environment, and that covers a lot of things. If you think about government in a positive way, that government is trying to do things to make life better, and through architecture and public service, there's a lot of broad categories that fit into Object 4. Not a lot of people go for that, but certainly if you're in government, that's probably the one you want to look at. Alternative career, volunteer work with organizations not directly connected with the built environment or service to society. Sounds kind of like the last one, but this is really an alternative career outside of architecture, but related back to and contributing to the profession in some indirect way. It's a little more subtle, the description of this. Again, I suggest you read it in a little more detail to see if this makes sense for you. Oh, and that was something important too. Must be clear that you are not gaining commissions through volunteer service. So if you're doing volunteer work and then you're getting work through it, that's not considered volunteer service. So think about that. And the last object is education, research, or literature. Like I say, this one was pulled out from Object 5 not that long ago. To advance the science and art of planning and building by advancing the standards of architecture, education and training. Show impact through teaching, student work, show how research has changed or improved the profession.
Yep.
Okay, the fun stuff, the jury. As Dan said, Carl Da Silva, who is, you can see his name is number 2 on here, helped share some of the information with us about the jury, and he gave us a lot of good insights. This is the 2024 Jury of Fellows for the national jury. I've updated this. This is new. And the fellows there are 7, is that right? 7, yes. 7 fellows sitting on the jury. They serve 3-year terms. 2 are rotated out every year, and then 3 are rotated out the 3rd year. The chairman is usually someone who's been is in their 3rd year of service to the fellows committee. So they've got a lot of history and understanding. It's not like a new fresh jury every year is coming in cold. They've had experience in the previous years on reviewing these. There are no hard fast rules for I'm sorry, wait a minute. I'm reading his notes there. Oh, something to note is that no one on the jury, if someone on the jury knows you, they will disqualify themselves from your review, or if they work with you, or some other thing, or if someone is in their home state, they also are recused from reviewing that. So they try to put in some checks and balances into the jury to make sure it's equitable and fair. And also, you will notice the distribution geographically of the folks across the country. They try to make the jury it's as well as diverse as they can. It's only 7 members. There's only so much you can do, but that's the good intention and intent.
Maybe I'll just jump in terms of the process. Let's say there's 200 applications. That's a lot of applications. How do you kind of organize your thinking? So what they do is they divvy off, let's say 30 submissions. Carl will kind of take over, and he'll become the advocate for that individual and present that to the other jurors. And so that's where the writing the key summary, the accomplishments, and then the sponsor letter, as well as the letter writers, he will really dive deep into that and be able to speak eloquently about it. And so that's kind of the process in terms of managing the amount of information that this jury is taking on.
Yeah, it's anywhere between 180 and 240 submissions. So dividing them up as you said is about 30 each, something like that. And so they go into that over several weeks, and they review them, and then they get together for 1 week with all the jurors, and they have 10 to 20 minutes to present their case to the rest of the jurors, and pros and cons, and then they deliberate and they talk about them, and then there is a consensus vote, and not a consensus. I'm sorry. There is a vote on whether or not the jury believes that they should be elevated or not. And like I said, one person is always sitting out. So there are 6 jury members that are voting at any one time, and it takes 4 votes to be elevated. So 2/3 vote to be elevated, 4 out of the 6, or 4 or more out of the 6.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, I think we just covered that actually.
Yep.
Again, these are the things we've already talked about: national recognition, ripple effect. Has the nominee been active in the AIA? Those are the types of test questions that the jury asks of each of the, or looks for in each of the submissions. They're looking for distinguished body of work, awards, notable contributions, lecturing, national leadership, widespread recognition, publications through publications and awards, sitting on juries, public speaking, leading seminars, publication in journals, national news coverage, peer recognition. So these are the types of things that I think resonate with the jury. When they see these types of things, they check boxes, or they don't literally check boxes, but they check off things that say, hey, this candidate's got something. Leadership in AIA can come in many forms. It doesn't have to be national office only. It can be local, regional office, committee chairmanships, jury service, authoring articles, making presentations at convention. All those things are important to note. And that actually brings us to the last page, which is where we have some things for you to write down. I mean, you can find these if you go to the AIA website, but there's a number, there's a sample application there. There are at least 8 to 12 examples of each object submissions that have risen to the top and over the last year or two. So you have a good resource to go and take a look at what others have done who have been elevated. And that's a very, very good resource. You want to, when you decide upon your object, go and take a look at others who have submitted in that object, and it will help you maybe clarify a little bit of how you want to organize your submission. Very, very good information.
Well, one thing that is worth mentioning is the jury, there is a discussion that is documented, and let's say you are not successful in the first round, you have the right, or that you have the ability to contact the AIA, or the AIA will contact the sponsor and say, okay, these are the things that you need to kind of brush up or clean up in the future. You might need to change your object. You might need to kind of go from design to practice or something, or technical or research. That is also really good information that you can feed into the second year of submitting.
Right, right. One last thing I'm going to leave you with is candidates should be creating portfolios, understanding that there is minimal time for the jury to read lengthy tests. And that's directly from Carl De Silva, one of the people on the jury. And I totally understand that. Sitting on over 30 AE selection panels, we don't have time to read every last word. So we need to capture the information, read what's relevant, and glean the information in a most effective manner. So think about that as you're reviewing and putting together your submissions.
Yeah.
Okay. With that, we've got about a half an hour left here before 7. So I'd like to open the floor up open it up for questions. I don't know if do you want to, Steve, pull people up, or how do we do this? Or can you open them up for questions?
Everyone is self-muted, so if you want to unmute yourself and just ask a question, please feel free to do so.
Okay, with the risk of people talking over each other, let's someone ask a question.
Hey, this is Evan Smith. I have several questions, but I'll narrow it down to, I think, sort of 2. Reading through some of the different objects and examples, for instance, object 4, public service government. And I noticed in most, if not all of the examples, it was highlighted as one or the other, public service or government. And so for me, my check has City of Chicago, I work for CPS. So like, to me, that's one and the same, or are they not one and the same? That's my first question.
Are you asking whether or not object 4 seems to fit your case?
It fits, but I noticed in the other examples on the website or the previous examples, people would highlight quote unquote public service, or they would highlight quote unquote government, and government and public service overlaps.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
And so I mean, knowing a little bit about your background, Evan,
Right.
I think you're in the right category. I think it makes sense, and I think maybe we can have a further discussion, because I know you're going this year for it, and, and you're getting your endorsement. So no, I think you're where you need to be. Yeah.
Okay. 2 other quick questions. Part of what I'm preparing relates to mentorship, and while I can document ripple effect to describe that, it comes down to confidentiality. Like, I have lists of hundreds probably of individuals, either in the last 10 years, actually throughout my entire career, that I can use to describe that ripple effect. But to prove it out without using their names, is there's like a confidentiality. I'm just curious, how do you document something like that in terms of, I can tell you how many people, but it doesn't prove it out, right? I have some other ideas how to prove it out in some select areas or select individuals, but do you just quantify it and try to?
I'll give my thoughts on that, and then Dan, I don't know if you have any thought on that too. I would say, yeah, you don't necessarily need to name individuals, but if you are teaching, you are, we're teaching a class of architectural students, and you've done that for 10 years, and you've graduated or helped graduate 250 students, in architecture. I mean, that's the type of thing I think that's relevant, as opposed to the specific name.
Okay.
If, on the other hand, you have someone who is willing to allow their name to be used, that you feel has been, you have influenced so much, and now they've gone on to become president of something, well, that's great. If you get their permission to utilize that, that's fine too.
Okay, and then the last quick question, and yeah, I know I need to have a couple offline conversations, but some advice, discussions, but timing of exhibits, and as specifically as it relates to ripple effect. You know, my career goes back, I won't tell you all how old I am, but from day one in Chicago.
We're all old, Evan.
But in all seriousness, from the public sector government realm, I have some very clear things that occurred that show where I started my career. And not that I'm ending my career in another year or two totally, but ending it in the same category of public sector and government. And so I have lots of things to fill in between, right? And I thought I read at some point focusing on the last 10 years, but I know that there are things that I need to share that are important. I guess I can go back to those things, correct?
Yeah, of course. I think that the reason they talk about 10 years, they're probably talking, you know, they don't want, just like in an architectural engineering AE selection, you don't want everyone's projects to be 20 years old and that's when they did the best work, and the last 15 they've done nothing. You know, that doesn't really fly very well. So excuse me, you want things that are relevant, contemporary as you can. And I would imagine if you really did some soul searching, you'll find that a lot of the big accomplishments in your career may be, you know, in your later career. Doesn't say you can't include some of the earlier things. And especially if you're talking about trying to prove ripple effects, some of those older things may be easier to show how the ripple effect has taken off, and maybe a program you implemented 15 years ago is still going strong,
or longer, or something I did that saved people millions and millions of dollars, right, in the municipal sector. But okay, all right, that helps.
All right, let's give someone else a shot.
Okay.
Greg Randall has a question in the chat. I don't know if you want to take a look at that, Bob.
Yeah, I took a look at that, Greg, and I think it's a good question, but I think it's really looking at the ripple effect that your work has done and how it's influenced other practices and advanced the profession. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be out there kind of giving lots of talks and presentations if your work is speaking for itself. But I think you know, finding people that can talk about, gee whiz, I've been watching Greg's work, and you know, this is you know, I've learned a lot from him. It doesn't have to be on a grand scale. I was going to share my screen just for a moment, and I think maybe this might cover the question that just came up here, if I can just figure out how to do this. Can people see this image?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay, hold on. This is where I'm an old fart, and
the green button with the arrow that something's happening. So there you go. Okay.
Come on.
If you could.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So
to read it, right?
Yeah, you don't have to read this, but this, in my submission back in '98, this was my exhibit page, and essentially what this was trying to do was describe activities through, let's say, you know, from '87 to '98, what I was doing in education and practice, significant work that was built, service to the community, publications, and awards and commissions. And I think that this was literally cribbed from Christine Fallon's advice to me. She came up through SOM and in the computer group, and she said, well, gee whiz, I had to show that while I'm just a computer geek, I was doing all these things on multiple levels over a period of years. So I think that it might be, in the former question, you know, something that you did, let's say 20 years ago, it might show that you just started and it was a small little thing, and then it started to blossom and it got bigger and bigger. There might be a way of graphically showing that, similar to Stanley's genealogy of Chicago architecture. And, you know, you kind of look at Skidmore and then see all of the kind of the legacy that they've built that followed them. So there's ways that you can kind of craft your story that's not, at this point, we hadn't built all that much stuff, but we were still active in the community. So anyway, I will.
Yeah, and I'll add too that Greg, and that tool or that format that Dan just utilized may be a way to mitigate some of your areas where you're not as strong as in other areas, because it'll put together, maybe, yeah, it'll throw in some of your speaking engagements or your publications, but they don't have to be profound. They don't have to be as strong as others. But when you see it in a setup chart like that, and then you expand upon it later, it lets, again, the juries know and see and recognize that you do have some of that you do have some speaking engagements, you do have some awards, you do have some things, even if it's not as robust as you've seen in other submissions.
Yeah. And again, if you feel you need to get some stuff published or whatever, then that might be a year's worth of work. And then maybe have a speaking engagement at the AIA and so forth, if to bolster it.
And that's something too. You can continue to supplement your career, and add to it if you find an area that you feel you're a little weak. Doing exactly what Dan says is good. I also found racking your brain. I mean, I had to go back, and this is 2016. I started Googling myself and Googling things, and I came up with all sorts of little speaking engagements or little articles or whatever that I'd totally forgotten about. And they may not be the biggest, most profound thing, but sometimes when you have only one or two in a category, and now I've got 10, well, it makes it look like you've got a lot more information. Well, you do have a lot more information there, legitimately.
Okay, and I can answer Roderick's question. We will be having a mentoring session on August 31st. What happens with that, Roderick, is that anybody who's nominated by the chapter, I contact and have you send in a draft of your submission in advance. And that's how you kind of book your spot for mentoring on that day. And it will be an in-person mentoring session. So I'll be in contact with you.
Good.
Any other questions?
Looking
I
through
don't
the
recall, as a former president of the Chicago chapter, I don't recall signing off on the submittals. Did you say somewhere in that the chapter actually, or the president or secretary does the signing off of the nomination?
Yeah, you have to be nominated by the chapter. There's a process, Peter,
Okay.
where we solicit for it every year in March or so, and the committee reviews all of the submittals, and either you're nominated or they ask you for more information, or we try to work something out to help people get the nomination. And then after you're nominated by the chapter, when you do the submittal, the chapter president signs something that I distribute to people, is what it comes down to. When you do the submission, then I basically have the chapter president's signature, and I send you the form that it's on for people to upload with their submission.
Okay.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that takes the place of the 10 architects or the 5 fellows.
Right. Right.
Place of that, because the chapter president is signing it because the committee has endorsed that candidate.
Yeah, and it's been a while, so I may just have not. I may have done it and not remembered it. So
yeah. By the way, it doesn't preclude it. This is Chicago's way of doing it.
Right.
Because we have so many that come in, we've got quite a volume, and we like I said at the beginning, we want to make sure that we're putting forward the best quality and qualified candidates that we can, and maybe suggesting that some take another look at it and resubmit the following year for the endorsement. But anybody is eligible to do that on their own if they get the 5 or 10 signatures.
thanks.
Well, I we're gonna ask one more time before we move on, but I'm gonna also say, if any of you think of hot burning questions after we go off here, please feel free to reach out to myself or to Dan, or to Steve, and ask away. We'll be happy to help and offer whatever information we can. I see a lot of names that I don't think I've seen in Chicago submit before, so that's good. That means some people are planning ahead and learning more information about fellowship, and that's good, because the more you learn. I remember I attended I think 2 of these demystifying, they called it demystifying fellowship seminars at the national conference 2 or 3 years in a row before I finally thought, well, maybe I should try, So the more information you learn, the more confidence you get, and the better you're able to sit down and put the hard work in that it takes to put a good submission together. So, okay, one last opportunity. Got any other questions?
There's one more question in the chat, Bob.
Oh. Question about resubmission. Do the declarations for each project carry over? The reference letters carry over, the 7 reference letters, and then in the second year you need 3 new reference letters. The declarations, if you mean the
responsibility for a project.
Yeah, responsibility for a project. Yes, that doesn't have to be redone. You're likely going to utilize that again in your second submission. You may modify it somewhat, but in a lot of cases, I would imagine that declaration is going to hold true and still be applicable in the second year. Now, if you decide you're going to pull out a couple of exhibits and put in a couple of new ones, well, then of course you'd need to get those new declarations for those new projects. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Good.
I do think that the fellowship and this whole exercise is a way of getting you to look at yourself again, and it will help position your project, your life's project, in an interesting and a good way if you can kind of condense it down into what are those 35 words. And so I think it's I think it will help everybody in your lives to actually go through this. So it's the opportunity.
I couldn't agree more, Dan. After going through the hard work to do that summer and finally submitting it, I had to submit it a week early because I was taking a vacation to Malta that year, and boy, did I feel good about it. But you do learn something about yourself, and I think it really helped me coalesce who I was as an architect and what my career really meant to me. And even if I told myself, even if I don't get fellowship, I was happy to have gone through the process because I really learned something about myself.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. Spread the word. If others next year, we were going to do this again. Maybe Dan and I will tag team again next year. We'll see if I can twist his arm. But thank you all for attending, and good luck in whatever path you're choosing toward fellowship.
Thank you. Thank you for your time, guys.
Thank you.